Hello everybody, Trench Officer 1918 here. Today I shall be talking about Byzantine Lutheranism, or Evangelical Lutheranism, sometimes called Eastern Lutheranism. On other occasions, Evangelical Catholicism, Catholic Evangelism, or my personal favorite, Evangelical Eastern Ukrainian Lutheranism of the Byzantine Rite. So, it's popular in Slovenia, Slovakia, the Western Ukraine, parts of Poland and Romania, pretty much anywhere where you could find a Ruthenian. It's also called, oh right, that's it, screw the bloody names, roll the intro. Well, isn't this a fun and just not boring topic at all? So, a quick explanation to the vocabulary I'm going to be using in this video. One is the word Ruthenia. When I say Ruthenia, I do not mean the medieval Latin term for all of Rus, Rus being Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. What I do mean, though, is the western section of Ukraine that took on the name Ruthenia around the 18th century or early 19th century, depending on... Well, I'm not entirely sure why only that part has a name, but I do know that the Carpatho-Ruthenian / Carpatho-Rusian people live here, as well as in parts of Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, Poland, of course, and these are all places where you can find not only a prominent Byzantine Catholic presence, because the Carpatho-Rusian people are majority Byzantine Catholic, but also the people we're talking about today, the Byzantine Lutherans, or for the sake of brevity, the Eastern Lutherans, or I'll just probably be sticking with Byzantine Lutheran today, because there is like 4 different names for this. Right then, no more of this explanation nonsense. Let's actually get to me talking in the video. So, the Byzantine Lutheran faith retains many of its Eastern traditions, such as the Julian calendar. It also celebrates the feast days of many old Orthodox saints, for example, St. John Chrysostom or St. Vladimir. However, due to being Lutheran, they also celebrate even Dr. Luther himself. Also, just felt like it's worth mentioning, Nestor the Chronicler is celebrated within their calendar. If you have read the Rus Primary Chronicle, you'd know why that's worth mentioning for the topic at hand. Along with this, they make use of Byzantine architecture / Eastern Slavic architecture, such as onion domes and other such, well, mostly the Eastern Slavic style. I have yet to see any of the proper Byzantine buildings, like the stuff you see in Serbia, or Greece, in Bulgaria. Funny enough, most of the Rus realms rarely use Byzantine architecture. They also keep Lent in a similar fashion to the Orthodox. If you wish to read up on how Orthodoxy does Lent, or Byzantine Catholicism also does Lent, there should be some videos online about it. I don't really have time to get into it here. Of course, as a body within the Lutheran faith, it still retains its Lutheranism. It's Lutheranism. Wow, yes, that's such a wonderful use of words. For example, it of course subscribes to Sola Scriptura, as well as the Lutheran confessions. Of course, I'm not entirely an expert on Lutheran theology, or theology as a whole for that matter. I'm not Saint Sava or Saint Justin, or even Justinian for that matter. Let's go forward to a topic I'm good at, or at least try to be. For as long as there was a Lutheranism, it has always had something of a desire for brotherhood with the Orthodox. According to some stories, Luther himself was hardly a fan of the Slavs, but still had a deep-found appreciation for the Orthodox faith. I'm sure many of you have heard the myth that Luther said, "I stand with the Greeks," or "I stand with the Orthodox," but while I don't believe this, well, I don't believe he said this, I do believe it's what he felt like, at least in the early days. Luther was generally positive towards the Eastern Church, I suppose due to our anti-papal stance on things. However, as far as I know, he never really tried for complete unity with the Orthodox. In fact, some stories talk about a time that they sent a letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople, and the Patriarch had written them back a letter explaining how, of the 99 theses or 95 theses, whatever they were, at least most of them were complete heresy. So while the church had no love for the Pope and all of that, it was probably more or less seen as just another nuisance in the West. And no doubt the Eastern churches would have worried about the heresies of Protestantism spreading to the Eastern realms, which it certainly did. There was still found Calvinists in parts of Serbia, but of course that never really boiled down into anything. However, a situation in Ukraine did, according to a Byzantine Lutheran pastor I met. Unfortunately, I can't really find much of anything on this story, which is rather odd because normally even the most obscure of religious rites have a lot of stuff written on them. On this, there's virtually nothing. I did, however, find a YouTube video of another Ukrainian Lutheran pastor who told a similar story. So I shall now more or less tell the tale I was told. There were two men, one named Martin and one named Stefan. Both were very close friends of Luther and apparently stayed in his house for a long time. I don't really know why that was relevant, but apparently it was a big deal back then. So, it was thanks to their efforts that, by the way, I'm pretty sure they were Polish. They came to the Ukraine with, well, their Lutheran faith. And apparently there are many churches within the Byzantine Catholics living in the Western Ukraine who were under a lot of pressure from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the time to, not reform, but de-Easternize. You see, apparently there was, at the time, a lot of trouble going on. A lot of trouble we'll use in quotation marks. Because this trouble more or less boiled down to neighborly disputes between local lords who didn't really want Orthodox in their areas, but the local Cossack population complicated things much later on. However, that's not important right now. What is that there was a large Orthodox minority and Byzantine Catholic minority within the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth who was under immense pressure to Westernize. So when they refused, apparently they got word of Lutheranism, and they twisted their own way of going through so that they could keep their Eastern traditions and still remain relatively Orthodox-ish. And this apparently worked. However, I don't really know why the Polish government wouldn't see Protestantism's worse than Orthodoxy, but I mean, hey, what do I know? I'm not Polish, right? So according to some, that is how the first Lutherans made it into the Eastern realm, or at least that's how they would describe it, which I'm not doubting what they say about their own church, don't get me wrong, not at all. I simply can't find anything on it. I could, however, find other stories about Protestantism and Lutheranism in Eastern Europe, such as in Russia, where it's the small Lutheran population they have are not Byzantine Lutherans, they are just German Lutherans, just normal Western Lutherans who, funny enough, actually say the Our Father in German during their services, but most of it's done in Russian. Of course, they do have the reputation of being Nazis and white supremacists, but that's not true at all. If you spend any time with these people, speaking to them, you realize there's no racism going on here. It's just propaganda. A large amount of what you hear about these people, the Lutherans in Russia, being mostly German, is also propaganda. Or they might be of German descent. Most of them in the modern days born in Germany. Even the archbishop, the Lutheran archbishop in Russia, is actually born in Russia, which is very different from how it's been normally. His wife's also Ukrainian. So, arguably, they've been, in my opinion, almost Russianized, or almost Easternized, even though they don't keep any of the Byzantine traditions, unlike their Ukrainian counterparts, who've made an entire new, I guess the word would be rite, who've made an entire new rite out of their newfound Protestant faith, which of course isn't new, it's been here since the 15th century, yada yada yada. However, I found some more interesting stories involving this that I'm going to get into later on in the video. Back to Ruthenia. Of course, like the rest of the religions in the Soviet Union, it was heavily persecuted. The Byzantine Lutheran clergy were martyred, tortured, and just all around giving a really hard time by the Soviet government. Theodore, I think his name was Yarchuk, but I can't really remember his last name too well. God forgive me for it. Was a priest, and apparently a really big deal in the Ukrainian Lutheran Church. He was tortured and killed in a place that is now called Ivano-Frankivsk, I think. I didn't know, I'd never even heard of the city until I read about the thing on Wikipedia. Of course, most of the persecutions took place in Galicia, and of course the western parts of Ukraine. Also, two important notes on this. Number one is, in the 1950s, the Ukrainian Lutheran Church did see a lot of, well, I guess what they would call a renaissance, as well as that is when it reached its popularity in Slovakia, as far as I've heard. And number two is, till this day, there aren't many Ukrainian Lutheran churches, well, still standing within their homeland. I suppose the Russian government, the Ukrainian government, as well as for some reason the Slovaks and Romanians and all those guys, aren't actually willing to pay for rebuilding them, which is very hypocritical, but that could also just be propaganda, given you are people who told me this story. By the way, I've met the Russian Lutherans. However, I've only ever met two Ukrainian Lutherans. One was a rather elderly chap who introduced me to his pastor, who was also a rather elderly chap, and he mostly told me all the stuff I'm using for this. I've fact-checked a lot of it, and there's a decent bit behind it. Everything but that one guy named Martin and the other chap named Stefan, which is only backed up by another old man from Ukraine who's a Lutheran. Yeah, there's not much info on this, but as earlier mentioned, a Lutheran archbishop did give his take on things, which I shall probably narrate in a part 2 of this video. Well, that should be about it for this one. I shall be posting a part 2 of this likely tomorrow. Hopefully this video wasn't too long or too boring. Well, I need to get an outro, because saying goodbye is very awkward and weird on this channel. So I shall leave you with this one quote from a movie I like. Just gonna let the clip play in the background. Okay, bye. Right, that is going to be it for this one. I shall see you in part 2, where I will be fully narrating a Lutheran archbishop's full words on this subject, where you'll probably get much more information about it than all of the weird little fun facts I've given you throughout this thing. Right, goodbye everyone.
Ані, то само візьме.
Ренц Вишневецький Алтенвереджет.
Візьмемо, батьку.
Геть! 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 Собаки невірні! Вон! Вон! Ви мені ясир забирати прийшли? Ні? Свиноїди! Геть!
Тугай бей, розсердився!
Розсердився!